Good afternoon, everyone. Back for another episode of Elevation Cast. Your host, Aidan Savage. I'm joined here today by John Lovell of Lovell Consulting, who are based in London and are trusted capital allowance specialists. They've been going for over 27 years, and I'm pleased to say that I'm joined with John to understand the background and where the company's at now, where's it been over the past few years. So, John, love to hand it over to you just to introduce yourself and give us a bit of a background around Lovell Consulting.
Thank you, Aidan. Yes, I set up Lovell Consulting nearly 28 years ago, and my first background was as a chartered quantity surveyor, and I qualified in surveying and worked on various construction projects. And then back in 1992, there was a pretty savage recession in the UK, and I was thinking I need to specialise, do something slightly different, and I happened to stumble into the area of capital allowances, which is saving tax on property expenditure. And I was fortunate that I got a good job and was trained and learned in this particular discipline. You know, that quarter of a century has gone by very quickly.
Can imagine. Yeah, it certainly does flash before your eyes. Amazing. And how have you found it over? What were the kind of the turning points? Is there any key moments that kind of stick out in your mind as to, where you made a certain shift and progressed in a slightly different, maybe pivoted slightly and moved forward?
Yes. Well, as a quantity surveyor, you're trying to save people money on construction projects, but you never really know how much you've saved. And that was kind of one of the frustrating things in my previous career was, yes, you could say to clients, look, if you use a quantity surveyor, you should have a smoother construction project, you should have less surprises in terms of construction costs, but you never really could prove how much you've actually saved somebody. Now, the great thing about capital allowances, in contrast, is it is very tangible. So for every client that we work for, when we've finished our detailed work, we can tell them with certainty, this is what we've actually saved you, this is what we've added. And quite often we're looking at exercises whereby maybe their existing accountants or their project managers have had a go themselves at identifying the allowances, and then there's a clear benchmark. So again, we can prove to them, well, this is what your existing advisors achieve, and then through our specialist knowledge, our understanding, this is the extra over that we've been able to achieve for you. So that, I think most people who work in this discipline of capital allowances, they find that quite satisfying, that there's a very tangible, clear benefit that you're adding in terms of value. And in contrast, very few other professions have that. I guess
Yeah.
in medicine, you might be saving someone's life as an extreme example.
Yeah.
But that's something that I still enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the job satisfaction that we do it for. And, when you can see that the client can understand and can see the value that you've delivered, just makes the hard work worth it, doesn't it? At the end of the day.
Completely. And then the other challenge is in most years, the government, the Treasury, they change the tax legislation, keeping ahead of that, dealing with those changes, learning, overcoming those obstacles, and trying to continue to deliver value.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, it's something you no doubt have to keep finger on the pulse and ahead of the curve at all times, and kind of predict what's coming and keep your ears to the ground with what's expected to be announced and then what actually gets announced. It must be, forever changing kind of landscape for you guys.
Absolutely. And for all businesses.
Yeah.
And alongside Lovell Consulting, I do have a separate commercial property business, Lovell Investments, which directly invests in commercial property. And there are quite nice synergies between those two businesses.
Yeah, I can imagine. So tell us a little more about that. So what point did you diversify into the commercial property background?
Yeah. Well, I was a very early pioneer of home working. So when I started Lovell Consulting, I started from what was then my home. And I then, as I recruited people, I outgrew my home. And I did actually buy a early version of a loft with the intention of having a small team of people working in a loft. Now, you might be surprised that back then, this was around 2000, I had objections from some of my neighbours to working from home. Now, that's quite hard to comprehend now that home working is very well
Yeah.
established. We were a small team of quiet professionals. And I bought this property with the intention of living and working. And they were then planning objections. They spoke to the planning department, objected to my use of this building when they saw some computer trunking going into the property. And this was an industrial loft on the ground floor. And I quickly had to think, well, what are we going to do? And I ended up buying my first commercial property on a need basis, which was in Shoreditch. I bought in that location because it was close to the city, the transport was okay, but largely because it was cheap. So I
Yeah.
didn't have any great strategic insight that that area would become more fashionable, more popular. It was purely on the basis of need, and also it was cheap.
Yeah, well, yeah, two of the most important factors when deciding the first step in commercial properties, no doubt.
Yes, and I think, as I'm sure you're speaking to quite a lot of business owners, there's very few people who have a clear trajectory. So,
Yeah,
I never intended to have a property business, for instance. I didn't intend to directly own property. I didn't set out in life to think, well, I'm going to become a capital ounces specialist. So I think that's true of many business people, that the place that you end up is very different to the place that you start out, but you learn, you see opportunities on the journey.
yeah, absolutely, yeah, 100%. You just kind of have to roll with it, and it's never a straight linear line, is it? It's so cliche, but it is a roller coaster, and you've just got to hope for the best and kind of keep faith that that through working hard and doing a good job and providing a good service, that your customers will take you in that direction. And you're right, I think it's important not to try and get too fixated on one goal, because you've just got to go with wherever it's the path's kind of taking you. So when I'm assuming that that commercial portfolio has expanded a bit now, and where's that grown to, and how has that landscape changed over the last few years? Because as you've mentioned, it is quite normal now to start working from home, and obviously COVID must have changed an awful lot for you guys within that commercial property world.
Yeah, my commercial properties are all central London. So, as I mentioned, I started in Shoreditch. I have a bit of a concentration there, and in East London, Bethnal Green. And over time, I've shifted more into more core locations like Blackfriars, Farringdon, Holborn. And I buy where I see value. So, typically, an unloved building or an unloved location where I think there is going to be further investment. So the property business is kind of my fun business. The capital ounces business is the hard work business, dealing with clients, keeping clients. But it tends to be cash generative, and property businesses, they need cash. You need liquidity to deal with, like the COVID times, which were difficult for most property owners. So, touching on what you've said, I would say until COVID, the property business was quite an easy business if you bought good buildings. Their old model was that if you bought a building and did a great conversion, made it look nice externally and internally, it was relatively easy to find occupiers. And the location was not quite so key, because there were not so many landlords back then. And I'm not talking about the huge buildings, I'm talking about buildings sort of 10 to 20,000 square feet. The quality of the buildings provided by other landlords at that time were not such creative spaces or visually interesting. Now, COVID changed that because people obviously started working from home, particularly smaller businesses, and a lot of those smaller businesses, sort of 10 to 20 people businesses, a lot of them, they they handed back their leases, or if their leases were coming to an end, they didn't renew. And so
Yeah.
that meant that landlords had a lot more vacant space. And pretty much all landlords then had to improve the quality of their buildings. And around the same time, pre-COVID, WeWork had also changed the model. So the WeWork model was providing people much more flexibility, giving
Yeah.
spaces that people could walk into with all the furniture, all the meeting rooms, everything in place. So even pre-COVID, the model was changing, and
Yeah.
that was proving a challenge. What I would say is all landlords now, if you don't provide great spaces with flexible leases, with all the facilities in place, and again, I'm talking at the smaller end of the market, then you'll have empty buildings. So I've had to, like many other landlords, work a lot harder. I've had to reposition some of my buildings. But since December last year, thankfully, all my buildings are 100% occupied. And I think that's by being much more flexible, by creating more interesting spaces. But one thing I would say is location has always been a big thing. I mean, the old cliche, property is location, location, location. Yes, that's always been the case. But pre-COVID, pre-workspace, not workspace, the big American company that I mentioned previously, you could just deliver a pretty good building and the location was not so critical.
Yeah.
Now it's all about micro locations. So you might have two buildings in a similar geography, but if one is close to an underground and it's in the street that people want to be in, that building will be full. But your other building that's only 5 minutes away may well be empty. So
Yeah.
property has become much more like booking a hotel. So if you go to Italy, and as you're going to in a few weeks' time, you'll probably, like most people, book on one of the travel websites, Booking.com or similar.
Yeah.
Now, for office buildings, it's become kind of similar in the major cities
Right.
where you've got a lot of choice. People will just go onto Google and they will search in a location where they want to be.
Yeah.
And it's become very, very similar to property. Commercial property is very transparent now in terms of leasing space.
Right. Yeah, I can imagine it's well, as you point out, even sort of before COVID, it was a lot of that. I guess I don't know if it was, but certainly I think Google were one of the first ones to kind of shout about how creative their office spaces were, and creating all these different areas and yeah, making it, I guess, more like kind of an activity center almost. They want it to, and I get it. They want people to be creative, and it's the whole point. But you've certainly see that bleed into even micro businesses. They want an office space that is aesthetically pleasing and quite creative, and maybe quotes on the walls and things like that. I even notice it myself from going around clients, and they've had interior designers coming in to do the offices. It's not like it is back in the day. Yeah, I can imagine that people can potentially be quite demanding with what they're looking for. They don't just want a off the shelf office. They want something with a bit of creativity.
Yes, I completely agree that 10 years ago, most office buildings were very boring. They had a raised floor, they had a metal suspended ceiling with very simple lighting, and it was almost like I'd describe them as kind of a horizontal coffin. And it didn't matter whether you were in one of those buildings in London, then you'd be in the same building in New York or wherever, any city in the world, and they were kind of identikit buildings. Now, for larger buildings, the really large buildings, that's to some extent that's still true, albeit if it's a large corporate, they'll probably have a running track on the roof. They'll have some breakout areas. They might have a bar in the building, but they're still, generally speaking, relatively boring
Yeah.
spaces. Where I think you've seen a lot more creativity is in some of those small and medium-sized buildings, where visually they're a lot more interesting. And 10 years ago, as I say, most people working in boring offices, but where were they spending their leisure time? They were spending their leisure time in hotels, coffee shops, cinemas, and the like, where the designs had really moved on. And even 10 years ago, people were hanging out in visually interesting spaces. And I think what has happened is COVID, WeWork, they have accelerated the pace of that change so that a lot of small and medium sized offices are more like a coffee shop, they're more like a bar,
Yeah.
where that creativity has been there for a long time. And landlords and occupiers have had to do it in order to entice people back towards office working.
Yes, because that must have been a major part of it is coming back out of COVID and trying to get people back into the office and making them, actually want to be in the office as opposed to being at home. That must have been a huge factor in this shift.
It has. I mean, there has been I would say, in the last 12 months or so, there has been quite a cultural shift again that I think a lot of companies have realised that you have better team working within an office environment. It's a lot easier to manage a business. Clearly, it depends from one business to another, but I'm talking generally
Yeah,
that if you've got people in an office environment, they learn better, there's more coordinated than
definitely.
if you've got hundreds of people working in their home environments. So I think there's been a shift back towards the office environment. And
Yeah.
where I'm based in Blackfriars, Farringdon, the streetscape is busier now than it was pre-COVID, with the exception of
Wow.
maybe Fridays.
Wow. Yeah, like you said, I even think workers are starting to I think the novelty from working from home. I'm certainly speaking to friends and people within my network. I've even personally noticed a shift over the last certainly the last 12 months, whereby people are actually wanting to be back in the office now because they do feel that eventually the novelty kind of wore off. It was nice to be at home and feel like you have the freedom, but then it became difficult to distinguish, home life from work life, and it kind of bleeds into the two. And unfortunately, me being self-employed, I work from home all the time, so I do understand that. And sometimes I've, debated getting an office myself. It just hasn't really been worth it for all man band. I've tried some of the hot desking places, but I certainly feel that if I were, if part of a larger team, I think I would want to be in the office. You'd want that camaraderie and, the interactions that you have with other humans. I think it's, you miss out on a lot by not being in the office. And so it's good to see that culture has started to pendulum back across, because for a long time, people still seem to think that working from home was the answer. And, I just, being a business owner myself, I just never really saw how the productivity could have been at the same level as when they're being in an office.
Yes, I agree. I mean, there's clearly some exceptions for some
Yeah,
businesses. And look, if you are a 10-person office, it may cost you 100,000 a year to have an office by the time you paid your rent, business rate, service charge, and the like. So for a small
yeah,
company, saving 100K with 5, 10 people a year is quite understandable. And I think, that will be around for quite some time. And then I think what they're doing is they're meeting up periodically, they're hiring meeting rooms. So
yeah,
they are still having some interaction. So I think there's like everything in life, there's no single answer. But
yeah,
definitely the trend, certainly for slightly larger companies, is the office environment still works in terms of training, socialization, and
yeah,
so on. But clearly, if you're maybe a mature person and you predominantly work alone, and then, like some lawyers, so there are, for instance, I'm thinking property lawyers in particular, they're very experienced, they've got their book of clients, they've got a 2 hour commute each direction to go into their office,
yes.
then understandably they're going to be highly resistant to spending 3, 4 hours a day commuting when they can be doing that in their nice garden at home. Clearly, you can see their perspective.
Oh, 100%. Definitely. Like you say, it's horses for courses. And there's no one size fits all, and I think that's the same with anything in this world, to be honest. Yeah. So just going back over to the Lovell Consulting side, I'm right in saying it's been 27 years of business now. Is that right?
Correct, yes.
That is incredible. That is absolutely incredible. It's something you must be extremely proud of. So, congratulations on that. And something I just wanted to get your perspective on, which I'm sure many of the listeners, viewers will be interested in as well, is over those 27 years, how have you kind of stayed at the forefront of the technological changes and advancements that have come into the industry? Because you must have seen so much change over the last 27 years. And sometimes it can get quite overwhelming to keep on top of all of these things. So how have you found it?
Well, one advantage that we've had is we only work in one particular area of tax, capital allowances. So, when I started in my career in tax, the tax legislation was about this high. Now
Yeah.
it's up here. So we have an incredibly complex tax code. Having said that, if you're specialising predominantly in one single area, it is a lot easier to keep ahead compared with a generalist. So, if you're a GP as a doctor, it's a lot harder keeping ahead of all the medical treatments than if you are, I don't know, a knee specialist,
Yeah.
in contrast. So, we are kind of the knee specialist equivalents of the tax world. So, that makes life easier. But what I would say is we've always been pioneers of technology. So when I came into this area, I realized we needed to have good IT. And at that time, most of my competitors, they were using many different systems. So they would use one piece of software to do the capital allowances analysis. Then they would transfer the output from that into Excel. Then it would go from Excel into a Word report. So
Mm.
it was very cumbersome. So if you made a change, and you used to hate somebody reviewing your work because it wasn't a quick fix. You had
Yeah.
to change everything in all that documentation and then maybe change it several times during a review process. So the first thing I did was I was fortunate. I knew someone who had been a former tax inspector with HMRC who was writing software for banks. So he understood tax, he understood software and IT. And I showed him the output that I wanted to achieve, and I showed him the kind of input that we were getting at that time. And I said, look, I want one piece of software that we can then use that gives us 100% output just through that one software. And he developed that for us, we refined it, and that gave us a complete competitive advantage. We were able to do things quicker and slicker, and we still use that software today, albeit it gets updated and varied. So tech is very important in terms of simplifying processes.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, 100%. It's it's the autonomous side, isn't it? It's the efficiency. I think a lot of companies can be slow to adapt to the technological changes, and it can often be the nail in the coffin for a lot of people, because you do need to keep up with these things. I know, certainly from speaking, just to give an example, I've had a couple of accountants within the accountancy world, obviously, when the whole shift came for like cloud-based software, Zero, QuickBooks, and the likes. There certainly were a lot of accountants quite reluctant to move and still using the old Sage systems, or analog systems, slightly outdated. And it kind of meant that they almost kind of came to the end of their profession because they just couldn't keep up with the new advancements in technology. So it is something that everyone has to be aware of. But amazing, you've got your own software, and it's great to speak to someone that's clearly at the forefront of that technology, and kind of sit ahead of the curve and seeing what efficiencies can be made when you kind of sit there and put the time and effort into it.
Absolutely. I mean, we use AI fairly limited at the moment. So,
Yeah,
and the reason for that is the quality of the inputs that we get from our clients. So,
yeah,
if we had good quality inputs, we would be able to automate even more. But the biggest problem that we have is people have used so many different accounting systems, and the quality of their data often is really poor.
hmm
So we have to do a lot of manual interventions with the data before we can actually analyze the expenditure. So for ourselves, and I think that will change over time. So, as you said, as more of the accounting firms are using AI themselves and people are inputting invoices in real time and you're getting accurate records, then we will be able to make more use of AI in the future.
Absolutely, yeah. It's obviously something that we're big on ourselves, and it is again it's a huge cliche, but AI really is just at the very beginning. I think people are now starting to see how powerful AI tools can be. You know, there's the Copilot Microsoft have got with the emails, and you're completely right. It is only as good as the information it's fed, and I think that's what a lot of people aren't understanding at the minute. They're using these online AI software such as ChatGPT and taking word as gospel as opposed to really understanding where it's drawing that information from. It's essentially just spitting out the average of all of the information it's collected. It'll go in nanoseconds, analyze all of the information that's out there on that topic, and spit back the average answer, basically. And I think it's a fantastic tool, and it's only going to get better. And to think where it's going to be in a few years is quite mind blowing. But I think that the fear of people thinking that it's going to have this mass unemployment effect and it's gonna cull loads of jobs. I just don't see that happening. It's there to automate and to make things easier, but a little bit like the internet, you know, business. We didn't have this huge economic downfall because the internet came and took everyone's jobs. Just made things easier for people, and if anything, it opened up worlds of new opportunities. I'm sure, again, no doubt you saw that yourself in the early days.
Yes, I think it's a tool to create greater efficiencies, and there will clearly be some jobs which are more vulnerable to AI. But I was listening to a talk with one of the pioneers of AI, and he was saying the safest job, most probably, is a plumber. It's going to
Yeah.
be very hard to use AI and robotics to go and fix a leaking pipe in your roof space. I think there's some jobs, any job which involves critical thinking, and predominantly what we do here is critical thinking, but
Mhm.
very simple, very routine jobs. They will be more vulnerable. But my bigger concern, and I was listening to a talk by the historian Niall Ferguson, and he was saying in academic life now, very often the students will use ChatGPT to read the references for them. They'll use it to write the essay for them, and it takes away their power of critical thinking.
No.
And if we're not careful, we're going to end up with a generation of dummies.
Yeah, yeah. I can't remember. I was having a conversation around this the other day with one of our guests, and it is that there is a generation that are starting to grow up, with Chat GPT and AI tools as the norm, and a little bit like with the internet. You know, I was fortunate enough to know. I still remember a time before the internet. I'm at that cusp, but there's the generation after myself. They don't know a world without internet, and I think if you took the internet away, it would just cause immense problems for them. They'd really struggle. Whereas us that remember the times without internet, I don't think, I certainly wouldn't struggle. Yes, it would be a different world, but I wouldn't struggle. And I think the same is going to happen with AI. People
Yeah.
become more reliant on it.
Well, 45 years ago, when I was studying quantity surveying at university, the construction press was full of articles, The Death of the Quantity Surveyor. And it was saying that computer aided design, and this was back in the 1980s, would make all quantity surveyors redundant. But the computer aided design, it would be able to automate cost control for building projects, and there would be no need anymore for quantity surveyors to be engaged by clients. Now, the reality has been completely different. Quantity surveyors have adapted, and I think there's more quantity surveyors, and in general, they're much better paid, even beyond inflation in that period, than they were in the 90s. And it's become a complete myth. I mean, look at Crossrail. what cost control has there been
Yeah.
on Crossrail? I think there's been even more need for quantity surveying skills and expertise, and certainly it's been completely blown out of the water with
Yeah.
Crossrail. I'm sure there was lots of CAD used in terms of designing those tunnels or certainly drawing them, but that was just purely a tool. So I think with professions which rely on brain cells, and that's most professions, AI will become a tool. You may need less people. You do
Yeah.
things quicker. You do things more efficiently. In the same way, I'm sure you've never in your career added up a column of figures. You've put them into a spreadsheet or you've used a calculator.
Yeah.
So I think for many things, there'll be a tool. AI can be used more efficiently, I think, for diagnostics of like medical tests. But I think you'll still want a doctor to interpret the results of those AI before you have some kind of operation. I know I certainly will. And but
Absolutely. Yeah.
we've got planes that can probably fly without pilots. Now, how many of us feel that comfortable about going on a plane
Hmm.
without a pilot on board, or two pilots for that matter?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good analogy. You're completely right. You still want to know that there is human intervention if anything does fail and it needs interventions. Absolutely, brilliant. Just going back to some of the questions that I was very keen to ask is, and I know this is a basic one, and it's probably one you get asked quite a lot, but um, in in terms of success, what's the one bit of advice that you would give to our viewers or listeners that you kind of maybe determined to be the reason why you've had such a long career in what you've done? Is there a secret, or what's the advice you would give?
My advice is do something that you really like doing, and then it doesn't feel like work.
Yeah.
I can honestly say in my career doing capital allowances, I've really enjoyed it. And most days it doesn't feel like hard work,
Yeah.
and time passes for me very quickly. And the same in my property business. It's a fun business. There's challenges. And I think the best advice is literally that. Do something that you really enjoy. Do something that you're going to become good at,
Yeah.
and believe in yourself. So, we've all been to school, we've all heard lots of speeches from teachers, headmasters, but the one talk that sticks in my mind is a headmaster, and I think we're a group of like 11, 12 year olds. He said, every one of you in this room has a talent, and you may not be aware of what that talent is, and it may only develop over time. But he said, I can assure you, you all have a talent for doing something, and just spend your life finding what that talent is. And I remember at the time being struck, well, I'm not talented, I'm not the best at maths, I'm not the best at running. And but it was kind of inspirational to me at that time to think, well, there must be something that I can find to be, good at.
Yeah.
And it's like the story of being chased by a lion. You only have to run faster than the next person.
Yeah.
And business life is a little bit like that. You just have to be a little bit better than your competitors.
Yeah.
So my advice would be find something that you really enjoy, become really good at it, and stay ahead of your competitors.
Great advice. Really good advice. So, with Lovell Consulting, obviously 27 years is an immense time in business and no small feat. But so what's the vision for the future then? Is this something that you've still got goals and aspirations for? Because when you get to this point in business, where's your mindset with the whole future?
Yeah. Well, some of my contemporaries, they've sold their businesses, and in some cases, they've gone on and done different things. Some of them have retired. I tend to take a slightly longer perspective, and that may be due to my parents. My father is still very much alive at 97. My mother lived
Amazing.
to 96. I've kind
Fantastic.
of been blessed or cursed with a longer time horizon. I'm also very much influenced by Warren Buffett and his colleague Charlie Munger,
Yeah.
they carried on working pretty much all through. They're well into their 90s now.
Yeah.
They work because they enjoy it. They don't work to become super rich, albeit they are super rich. They've done it because it's what they enjoy, and so I still enjoy what I do. I like having the two separate businesses. There's a nice marriage between the two. We still train. We have young people in the business. We do training to. We've got somebody in the office today who's at school. So we do work experience for people. We take
Brilliant.
on graduates, and we have a nice atmosphere in the team. So most of us have worked together for 15 plus years, not everybody. And it doesn't, I think for most of us, it doesn't really feel like work.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. That's a great. Yeah, it's a great culture to have created as well. Credit to yourself. I've always been a firm believer that everything starts at the top, and it showers down. You've got to have the right leadership. I think this is where a lot of businesses taking that next step. They're maybe there for a few years, and it's time to expand the team, and they don't quite get the management structure right, or they don't. The managers that are given the opportunities don't quite have the right people skills, and it can really kind of put the brakes on. It can really stop that growth because you've got to create a culture where people enjoy coming to work. Yeah, it's a massive part. If you've happy staff, productive staff at the end of the day, and you'll probably you know that yourself.
Yeah, and I think a lot of businesses fall into the trap of chasing turnover. So
Yeah,
their objective is to have lots of offices, lots of people, be in many countries, which for certain businesses makes complete sense. Now, my businesses are kind of at the opposite end of that scale, and we focus much more on profitability. And profitability sometimes is not through having many offices, having loads of people. It's different for every business may have different strategy. But the strategy that we have pursued here in both businesses is much more on profitability than turnover.
yeah,
And the thing I find quite fascinating to ask young people when we're interviewing people is what is the most important parameter for the success of any business? And the vast majority of them will say it's sales, it's turnover, it's profits, it's growth, it's business strategy. But very few of them actually answer the key point. The key point of any business between success and failure is cash flow. It's about managing your cash. And I don't
absolutely.
think we train younger people enough on the importance of cash flow.
Yeah, completely agree. Yeah, no, 100%. It is. I've always felt it's between cash flow and action or inaction. If someone's not doing enough, I completely agree. It's the two biggest downfalls of a business. It's so important. I think people can often they see the numbers coming in, but they don't really understand maybe the key metrics behind what it is that they're trying to do. Their forecasting can be out quite a bit, and before they know it, it's that they've got themselves tied in knots. It's such a crucial, especially in the early years, which leads me on quite nicely actually to a question that the problems that businesses face in the early years are often very different to when they've become more established, like yourself, and they're further on the journey. When you get to 27 years in business, what are the problems that you might come across, or the obstacles that you've got to overcome? Because I can imagine they can be quite different to the early days.
Yeah, I think it links with what you were saying. I'd say the biggest challenge is complacency. So
Yeah,
if you've been in business for quite a long time, you can become complacent.
yeah,
And like your example, we've always used Sage. So we're just going to carry on doing what we did before because it worked for the last 10, 20 years.
yeah.
So I think that is a challenge for mature businesses. You need inspiration. Sometimes it comes from within your team. Sometimes it comes from your customers. But you need to read a lot. And That is my concern with some of the younger generation coming through. They're going to get over reliant on the AI.
Yeah.
You know, the business people that I see talk to who are successful, they're always reading, they're always learning. They might be learning via podcasts, they're not necessarily reading an encyclopedia,
Yes.
but they are always learning.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely key. I, try to do a lot of reading myself, and it's even just getting the insights and experience of other business owners, people that have been there and done it before. You don't have to, like you say, you've not got to be doing all these self-help books and 12 steps to success, all this kind of thing, but just reading about how people have been there and done it, or like you say, even listening to podcasts. And I think this is, again, one of the main driving factors behind the podcast that we're shooting today, is to try and understand the perspective of people that have been there, because that, it's invaluable to a lot of people. So so with Lovell Consulting, what are the goals for the next kind of 3 to 5 years? If you've got goals, do you still set goals?
It's a good question, Aidan. We do have goals. It's about maintaining profitability. It's about not missing deadlines for our clients. So, that's one of the key features. We're quick to respond. So we have a culture of nimbleness. And that is one of the problems that some of our much larger competitors have, is they're not nimble, they're slow. It takes
Yeah.
them a long time to take on a new client. It takes them a long time to do the work, to check it before it gets out of the door. Maintaining nimbleness is one of our key focuses. We do have competitors who are much larger than we are, but we're competing with the same kind of clients. So whilst we're a relatively small organisation, we work with disproportionately large clients in a lot of cases. So,
Yeah.
we cover the whole spectrum. We might do a husband and wife business at one end of the scale, but we may be dealing with a multinational at the other end. And it's, about providing that service.
What I always like to end the podcast on is this question here. If you could give one piece of advice to an aspiring entrepreneur looking to set up in their own business in 2025, what would that advice be?
It would be to invest in yourself. And I see a lot of people asking for investments in other businesses. And you may, look, if you were an early investor in one of Elon Musk's businesses, you'd have done phenomenally well. But I think the biggest investment you can make is in yourself, through learning, and starting small. I started very small. I took a risk, and there was just me in that business, and I was constantly on the phone. And you've
Yeah.
got to work hard. People will say David Beckham's been lucky, or they may say to me, some former colleagues have said, "Oh, you're just lucky. You were in the right place at the right time." Now, I'm sure David Beckham is lucky, but you will find that anyone who's successful in their business, they have created their own luck.
Yeah.
So David Beckham, he would have been up early doing the training. He would have been there late in the day doing the training. Instead of staying in bed late on a Saturday, Sunday morning, he'd have been up out there in all weathers.
Yeah.
He would have been grateful, and I'm sure he showed his gratitude to the people that helped him on his journey. And he's made smart decisions along the way. And that is true not just of Beckham, it's true pretty much of any business person who's achieved success.
Yeah.
And your success, you don't always, we can't all be billionaires. You may not be a millionaire, but you just need to be really good at whatever it is that you do and maintain positive cash flow. We look to the kind of legends of business, but there's very few of them. But there's many others who are on that path, who are on that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes people can get a bit fixated on becoming the next super entrepreneur and trying to be that millionaire, billionaire. And I think that a lot of people that are in that position, they do say that it's, of course, money gives you freedom, but it doesn't and again, a very cliche, but it doesn't buy you happiness. I think you can have a very happy life without being a millionaire, but I think the secret to happiness, and certainly within business myself, is if you can live a comfortable life and enjoy going to work, then you're better off than a majority of the world. So I think that's, something to
Yeah,
have.
I mean, a good example for me is in Islington, there is a fishmonger called Steve Hatt. Now, he just has one fish shop. Now, pretty much every day, he will sell his entire stock of fish. So his fish is always fresh, and he doesn't aim to be the cheapest. He aims to have the freshest fish, and it doesn't even smell of fish. I mean, there's some fish shops you walk past and they smell terrible. You'd never want to buy your fish from them.
Yeah.
Now, he has a team of people, and I'm sure it's very successful in terms of financials. Now, a business consultant would say to him, Steve, you've got a great model here. You should replicate this. There's space in London for 10 of your shops, and then we'll take it national, and then we'll take it global.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure if he'd have done that, he could have most probably done very well. But he's contented with his one very successful fish shop.
Yes.
And he's still motivated. He's not a young guy now, but his business is still very successful and has a very strong customer base.
Yeah.
So sometimes, business is not about being multi-global. It's being really good at what you do and delivering day after day.
Yeah. Yeah, completely agree. And I think that's a brilliant place to end the podcast there, John. Thank you very much for your time today. It's been really interesting speaking to you, getting the background, understanding someone that's been in business for many decades now, and getting your perspective. So thank you very much for giving up the time, and look forward to hopefully having another conversation again in the future.
Thanks, Aidan.
Cheers. Thanks, John.
Bye.